Hello and welcome back. I'm from the private Audiobooks channel, and in this video, I'll be with you. The topic of this video is Unshakable Self-Esteem Training. Whether you're trying to fall asleep or commuting after work, it doesn't matter where or how you are, just put on your headphones and benefit from this audiobook video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified of future daily audiobook videos. You can also access previous audiobook videos from the playlist titled 2-Hour Audiobooks in the cards. Ready? Let's get started. Chapter 1: Why Most Confidence is Fragile. There's a version of confidence you've been taught to believe in. It shows up in the way someone walks into a room, in the steady voice during a presentation, in the ability to make decisions without visible hesitation. You've probably been told that this is what you need. That if you could just build enough of it, everything else would fall into place. But here's what nobody mentions: this kind of confidence can disappear in an afternoon. You might have felt this yourself. One moment you're certain of your direction, clear about your worth, comfortable in your own presence. Then someone questions your judgment. A project fails. A relationship ends. A criticism lands in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. And suddenly, that certainty you thought was solid reveals itself to be something else entirely. Something that was never truly yours to begin with. This happens because what most people call confidence is actually something quite different. It's a feeling that depends on external conditions aligning in your favor. It requires the right feedback, the right results, the right responses from others. It needs the world to cooperate. And when the world doesn't, when circumstances shift or people react differently than you expected, that confidence doesn't just weaken. It collapses. The distinction here matters more than almost anything else you'll encounter in understanding yourself. Confidence is a response to competence. It's what emerges when you've done something enough times to trust your ability to do it again. There's nothing wrong with this. It serves a purpose. But it exists in a specific context, tied to specific situations, dependent on specific outcomes. You can be confident in your ability to solve a certain kind of problem, to perform a particular skill, to navigate a familiar environment. This confidence is real, but it's also conditional. It exists because conditions have supported it. Self-worth operates in an entirely different dimension. It isn't about what you can do. It's about what you are, independent of performance, achievement, or the opinions that surround you. It doesn't require proof. It doesn't need validation. It exists before you accomplish anything and remains after everything falls apart. But most people never develop access to this kind of stability, because they've spent their entire lives building the other thing instead. You learn early that approval feels good. A parent smiles when you behave a certain way. A teacher praises a correct answer. Friends respond warmly when you say what they want to hear. These moments feel like confirmation of your value, and in a sense, they are. But they're confirming something external, something performative. They're teaching you that your worth is something you earn through the right actions, the right words, the right way of being in the world. This pattern doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning label explaining that you're constructing a sense of self that will require constant maintenance. Instead, it feels natural. It feels like learning how the world works. And in many ways, it is. Society operates on systems of feedback and reinforcement. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be valued by others, with caring about how your actions affect the people around you. The problem emerges when this external validation becomes the primary, or only, source of your internal stability. You start making decisions not based on what feels true to you, but on what will generate the response you need. You edit your words before speaking, not for clarity, but for safety. You choose paths that others will understand rather than paths that genuinely call to you. You measure your days by how others reacted to you rather than by how present you were in your own experience. This happens so gradually that you don't notice the shift. One day you look around and realize you're not sure what you actually think about anything anymore, because you've spent so long calculating what you should think. The cost of approval dependency isn't just that you feel bad when you don't get approval. It's that you begin to organize your entire existence around preventing that feeling. Your life becomes a strategy for avoiding rejection rather than an expression of who you are. Every interaction carries an undercurrent of assessment. Every silence feels potentially meaningful. Every relationship becomes a place where your value is either confirmed or questioned. You're not free to simply be, because being isn't enough. You have to be acceptable. And here's the part that really traps people: sometimes this works. Sometimes you get the approval you're seeking. Someone praises your work. A relationship feels secure. Your efforts are recognized. In these moments, you feel good. You might even feel confident. But notice what's actually happening. Your internal state is rising and falling based on external conditions. When the conditions are favorable, you feel stable. When they're not, you don't. You've built a sense of self that requires the world to cooperate, and the world is not designed to cooperate consistently with anyone. This is why criticism can be so devastating. It's not just that someone disagrees with you or points out a flaw. It's that their words have the power to destabilize your entire sense of who you are. If your self-concept depends on positive feedback, then negative feedback doesn't just give you information. It threatens your foundation. A critique of your work becomes a critique of your value. A rejection in one area of life bleeds into every other area. You can't separate what you did from who you are, because you've never learned that distinction. People often try to solve this by getting better at things. They think that if they can just improve their skills, achieve more, make fewer mistakes, the criticism will stop. Or at least, they'll be more protected from it. But this misses the point entirely. The issue isn't whether the criticism is justified. The issue is why it has so much power over your internal state. You can become extraordinarily skilled, wildly successful by any external measure, and still find that a single comment from the right person can unravel you completely. Because competence doesn't create self-worth. It creates confidence in specific domains. And when those domains are challenged, the confidence goes with them. There's also a more subtle pattern that emerges from this structure. When your sense of self depends on external validation, you become hypervigilant to signs of approval or disapproval. You start reading into things that might mean nothing. A delayed response to a message. A change in someone's tone. A meeting you weren't invited to. Each of these can feel significant, not because they necessarily are, but because you've trained yourself to monitor the environment constantly for information about your standing. This isn't paranoia. It's a logical response to having placed your internal stability in external hands. This hypervigilance is exhausting in ways that are hard to articulate. You're never fully at rest, because there's always something to monitor, something to interpret, something that might shift the ground beneath you. Even in moments of apparent success, you can't fully relax, because success just means you have more to lose. The recognition you've gained could disappear. The relationship that feels secure could change. The identity you've built around achievement could be challenged by a single failure. You're constantly bracing, constantly managing, constantly trying to maintain something that was never meant to be maintained in this way. And then there are the moments when you realize that the approval you're seeking isn't even coming from people whose opinions you respect. You're organizing your life around the reactions of people you don't particularly like, or don't even know well, because somewhere along the way you learned that all approval counts the same. That being validated by anyone is better than not being validated at all. This is when the system really shows its dysfunction. You're sacrificing your genuine preferences, your authentic responses, your true inclinations, for feedback from sources that have no real meaning to you. But you can't stop, because the need for approval has become more powerful than the need for authenticity. The relationship between external validation and internal experience creates a specific kind of trap. The more you depend on others to feel good about yourself, the less you develop the capacity to generate that feeling internally. It's not that you lack the ability. It's that you've never exercised it. Your attention has been directed outward for so long that you don't have pathways to your own internal sense of stability. When you're alone, when there's no one to reflect you back to yourself, you might feel empty. Not because there's nothing there, but because you've never learned to access what's there without external confirmation. This is why people can feel loneliest in rooms full of people. Because the version of themselves they present in social situations isn't connected to anything solid inside. It's a performance that generates responses, but those responses don't fill anything real. They don't touch the place where actual stability lives, because that place hasn't been developed. The applause feels good in the moment, but it doesn't last, and it doesn't accumulate into anything you can rely on when you're by yourself. What makes this pattern so difficult to change is that it's reinforced constantly. The world does respond to you. People do form opinions. Your actions do have consequences. None of that is wrong. The problem is confusing social navigation with self-definition. Learning to read a room, to communicate effectively, to build relationships, these are valuable skills. But they become problematic when they're the only source of information you trust about your own worth. When the internal voice that could tell you, "I'm okay regardless of this outcome," has been silenced by the louder voice that says, "I'm only okay if this goes well." Most people don't realize they've made this trade until something forces them to notice. A relationship ends and suddenly they don't know who they are outside of it. A career changes and their identity seems to evaporate. They retire, or their children grow up, or they move to a new place where no one knows their history, and they feel like they're starting from nothing. Because in a very real sense, they are. They've spent decades building a self-concept based on external roles and responses, and when those shift, there's nothing underneath to stand on. The fragility of approval-based confidence becomes most obvious in moments of transition. When you're between identities, between roles, between the person you were and the person you're becoming, there's nothing to perform. No one knows what to expect from you yet. You don't have a reputation to maintain. And this should feel liberating, but often it feels terrifying instead. Because without the structure of others' expectations, without the familiar feedback loops, you're not sure what remains. This is actually the beginning of something important, though it rarely feels that way. These threshold moments, when the old structures of validation aren't available, are opportunities to discover what exists independent of those structures. But most people rush through them as quickly as possible, desperate to rebuild the familiar system of external confirmation. They find a new relationship, a new job, a new community, and immediately begin the process of establishing themselves, of generating the approval that will tell them they're okay. The opportunity to build something different passes unnoticed. Understanding why most confidence is fragile isn't about criticizing yourself for having depended on external validation. That dependency was learned, not chosen. It was installed by 1,000 small moments throughout your development, each one teaching you that your value was something to be determined by others. The awareness of this pattern isn't a judgment. It's a doorway. Because once you see how the mechanism works, once you understand what you've been doing and why it hasn't created the stability you're seeking, you can begin to build something else. That something else doesn't come from gathering more approval, from getting better at managing others' perceptions, or from finally achieving enough to feel secure. It comes from a fundamental shift in where you locate your sense of self. From recognizing that while feedback is information, it's not verdict. While relationships matter, they don't determine your worth. While achievement has value, it doesn't create your value. Your value exists prior to all of that, not as something you have to believe in despite evidence, but as something you discover when you stop looking for it in places it was never going to be found. Chapter 2: Where Self-Worth Comes From. There's a question that doesn't get asked often enough, and when it does get asked, the answers people give usually miss the point entirely. Where does your sense of worth actually come from? Not where should it come from, according to some philosophy or teaching. Not where you wish it came from. But where, in your actual lived experience, does that felt sense of being enough, of being fundamentally okay, originate? Most people, if they're honest, will recognize that their sense of worth fluctuates based on what's happening around them. A good day at work and they feel valuable. A difficult conversation and they question everything. Someone's approval lifts them. Someone's indifference deflates them. This isn't a character flaw. It's simply what happens when you've never been shown that worth can exist independent of circumstances. You've learned to derive your value from your performance, from others' responses, from external markers of success. And this creates a life where you're constantly trying to earn something that was never meant to be earned in the first place. The idea that your worth is separate from your performance sounds almost abstract when you first encounter it. How can you be valuable if you're not doing anything valuable? How can you matter if you're not achieving, contributing, succeeding? These questions reveal how deeply the confusion runs. They assume that value is something generated through action, something you create through effort. But this confuses worth with worthiness in a specific context. You can be worthy of a promotion because you've performed well. You can be worthy of respect in a relationship because you've been reliable. These are conditional evaluations based on behavior, and they're entirely appropriate in those contexts. But they're not the same thing as your fundamental worth as a person. Your worth as a person exists before you do anything. It exists when you fail. It exists when you're rejected. It exists when you make mistakes, when you disappoint others, when you don't live up to your own standards. This isn't a belief you're supposed to adopt. It's a recognition of something that's already true but that you've been trained to overlook. You existed before you achieved anything. You had worth as a child before you could contribute anything to the world. That worth didn't need to be earned then, and it doesn't need to be earned now. What's changed isn't your intrinsic value. What's changed is that you've learned to make that value conditional. This conditioning happens through 1,000 small moments. Every time you were praised for an achievement but not for simply being present. Every time love felt more available when you succeeded than when you struggled. Every time you noticed that people responded to what you did rather than who you were. None of these moments were necessarily malicious. Most were well-intentioned. But they taught you to connect your value to your output. To believe that you matter because of what you produce, not because you exist. The trap here is sophisticated. Achievement does matter in certain contexts. Skills are valuable. Contribution creates meaning. None of this is wrong. The problem emerges when these contextual values get confused with fundamental worth. When you start believing that your value as a person rises and falls with your accomplishments. That you're worth more when you're productive and worth less when you're not. That your significance is determined by what others think of you rather than by something more essential. This confusion creates a specific kind of suffering. You become trapped on a treadmill where enough is never actually enough. You achieve something and feel good briefly, then the feeling fades and you need the next achievement. You receive praise and it satisfies something momentarily, then you need more praise. You're never actually full, because you're trying to fill a need for fundamental worth with conditional approval. It's like trying to satisfy thirst by eating. The activity might be pleasant, but it doesn't address the actual need. People spend entire lives on this treadmill without realizing there's another way to approach the question of worth. They think the problem is that they haven't achieved enough yet, haven't found the right relationship yet, haven't reached the level of success that will finally make them feel secure. They're always moving toward a future moment when they'll finally feel okay. But that moment never actually arrives, because the whole framework is flawed. Worth that depends on conditions will always be vulnerable to those conditions changing. Understanding where worth actually comes from requires you to look at something you've probably been avoiding. The relationship you have with yourself when no one else is watching. The voice in your head that comments on everything you do. The way you speak to yourself in private moments. This internal dialogue is where your actual sense of worth lives or dies, and most people have never examined it carefully. Listen to how you talk to yourself for a day. Notice what happens when you make a mistake. Notice the tone you use when you don't meet your own expectations. Notice whether you extend yourself any compassion when things are difficult, or whether you immediately move to criticism and judgment. This internal voice is often harsher than anything anyone else would say to you. It's relentless, unforgiving, constantly monitoring for failure. And it's completely normalized. You've been doing this for so long that it doesn't even register as unusual. This internal harshness didn't develop randomly. It developed as a strategy. At some point, you learned that if you criticized yourself first, maybe others wouldn't need to. If you caught your own failures before anyone else did, maybe you could avoid external judgment. If you maintained impossibly high standards for yourself, maybe you'd be safe from rejection. The voice became a preemptive defense mechanism, attacking you before the world could. But somewhere along the way, the strategy became the problem. The voice that was supposed to protect you started undermining you instead. Most people don't realize they have a choice about this voice. They think it's just how they think, just who they are. But that's not true. The voice is a habit, and like any habit, it can be examined and changed. The first step isn't trying to make it positive. That usually doesn't work, because the mind recognizes false positivity and rejects it. The first step is simply noticing it. Becoming aware of how consistently harsh it is. How it rarely acknowledges anything you do well, but immediately highlights anything you do poorly. How it compares you unfavorably to others. How it assumes the worst about your motivations and capabilities. This awareness alone begins to create distance. You start to recognize that this voice isn't the truth about you. It's a perspective, one among many possible perspectives, and not necessarily a helpful one. You can hear the voice without believing it. You can notice the criticism without accepting it as fact. This doesn't mean you stop evaluating yourself or stop trying to improve. It means you stop using self-attack as your primary method of motivation. There's a different kind of internal dialogue available, one that most people have never experienced consistently. It's not about telling yourself you're great when you don't believe it. It's not about positive affirmations or forced self-love. It's something quieter and more stable. It's the capacity to witness yourself without constant judgment. To see your actions, your thoughts, your feelings, without immediately making them mean something about your fundamental worth. This witnessing presence is where actual self-worth lives. Not in achievement, not in others' approval, but in the part of you that can observe your experience without needing it to be different than it is. This isn't passive acceptance of everything. You can want to change, want to grow, want to improve, while simultaneously recognizing that your worth isn't conditional on those changes happening. You're enough now, and you'll still be enough if you grow, and you'll still be enough if you don't. Most people have glimpsed this state, usually in moments when they've stopped trying so hard. A quiet morning when they weren't performing for anyone. A moment in nature when the usual self-evaluation fell away. A conversation where they forgot to monitor how they were coming across. In these moments, there's a sense of ease that doesn't depend on anything being particularly good or bad. It's just a simple okayness, a basic sense of being fine as you are. But these moments usually pass quickly, dismissed as flukes or temporary respites before returning to the usual state of evaluation and striving. What if that ease isn't a fluke? What if it's actually your natural state, and the constant evaluation is what's unnatural? This is a significant reframe. You've probably assumed that you need to earn the right to feel okay, and that ease comes after achievement. But it's actually the opposite. The ease is already there, underneath all the noise. The achievement seeking is what covers it up. This doesn't mean ambition is wrong or that wanting things is problematic. It means the motivation matters. When you pursue things from a place of already being enough, the pursuit feels different. Lighter. Failure doesn't devastate you because it doesn't threaten your foundation. Success doesn't intoxicate you because you weren't banking your worth on it. You're playing a different game entirely, one where you can be fully engaged without your sense of self hanging in the balance. But getting to this place requires you to stop doing something you've been doing automatically for most of your life. You have to stop making everything mean something about you. A rejection doesn't mean you're unlovable. A failure doesn't mean you're incompetent. A criticism doesn't mean you're flawed. These are events, situations, feedback. They're information, sometimes useful, sometimes not. But they're not verdicts on your fundamental value. This distinction is crucial. You can receive feedback, even harsh feedback, without it touching your core sense of worth. You can fail at something, even fail badly, without it defining who you are. You can be rejected by someone without it meaning you're rejectable. The events of your life are separate from your value. They happen to you, they involve you, but they don't determine you. Most people resist this idea because they think it will make them complacent. They believe that if they stop tying their worth to their performance, they'll stop trying. They'll become lazy, unmotivated, directionless. But this fear is based on the assumption that the only effective motivation is fear-based motivation. The belief that you need to be constantly proving yourself, constantly earning your right to exist, or you'll collapse into inertia. This isn't how it works. When you're not spending enormous amounts of energy managing your self-concept, defending against threats to your worth, trying to maintain a precarious sense of okayness through achievement and approval, you actually have more energy available for genuine engagement. You can pursue things because they interest you, because they matter to you, because you want to, not because you need them to validate your existence. This creates a completely different quality of action. There's also something that happens when you stop seeking approval as if your life depends on it. You become more discerning about whose opinions actually matter to you. You realize you've been treating all feedback as equally significant, when in reality, some people's perspectives are much more relevant than others. Not because some people are better than others, but because some people know you, understand your context, share your values, have expertise in relevant areas. Their feedback is useful. Random opinions from people who don't know you, don't understand what you're trying to do, have different values or priorities, their feedback is just noise. When your worth depends on approval, you can't make this distinction. All approval feels necessary. All criticism feels threatening. But when your worth is stable, you can actually listen to feedback without it destabilizing you. You can take what's useful and leave what isn't. You can disagree with someone without needing them to be wrong. You can receive criticism without defending yourself reflexively. Because the criticism isn't attacking your foundation. It's just offering a perspective. This shift also changes how you relate to success. When you achieve something from a place of already being enough, the achievement is satisfying in a different way. It's not validating your worth. It's not proving anything. It's just something you did that you're pleased about. This might sound less exciting than the intoxicating high of success as validation, but it's actually more sustainable. The satisfaction is real rather than desperate. It doesn't need to be protected or amplified or proven over and over. It just is. The path to stable self-worth isn't about accumulating more evidence of your value. It's about recognizing that the entire framework of evidence-based worth is flawed. You don't need evidence. You don't need proof. You don't need others to confirm it or achievements to demonstrate it. Your worth exists in the same way your existence exists. It's simply true, prior to any evaluation. This recognition usually doesn't happen all at once. It emerges gradually as you begin to catch the ways you've been making your worth conditional. Each time you notice yourself thinking, "I'm only okay if this works out," you have an opportunity to question that thought. Is it actually true that your worth depends on this outcome? Or is that just a habit of thinking you've developed? What if you're okay either way? Not as a belief you force yourself to adopt, but as a genuine question worth exploring. The exploration is where the real work happens. Not in the big philosophical proclamations about self-worth, but in the small daily moments when you catch yourself tying your value to something conditional. When you notice the fear that you're not enough. When you feel the need to prove yourself. When you're performing for approval. These are the moments when you can make a different choice. Not to pretend you don't care about outcomes, but to unhook your fundamental worth from those outcomes. This unhooking is a practice, not a one-time achievement. You'll forget. You'll fall back into old patterns. You'll find yourself once again making your okayness conditional on something external. This is normal. The practice is noticing when it happens and choosing differently. Again and again. Not perfectly, not permanently, but consistently enough that a new pattern begins to form. That new pattern is what genuine self-worth feels like. It's not loud or exciting. It's not a high or a peak experience. It's something much quieter. It's a basic sense of being fine, right now, as you are. Not because everything is going well. Not because you've achieved enough. Not because others approve. Just a simple, stable sense that you're okay. That your existence has value independent of what you do with it. That you don't need to earn the right to take up space in the world. This might sound like a small thing, but it changes everything. When you're not constantly trying to prove your worth, you can actually live. You can take risks without terror. You can connect with others without desperation. You can pursue goals without your entire sense of self hanging in the balance. You can rest without guilt. You can fail without devastation. You can succeed without inflation. You exist in a steadier place, one that isn't constantly buffeted by circumstances. The steadiness isn't about circumstances being stable. Circumstances will never be stable. Life will always involve change, challenge, loss, uncertainty. The steadiness is about having something inside that doesn't depend on circumstances. A core that remains regardless of what's happening around it. This is what self-worth actually is. Not a feeling of specialness or superiority. Not confidence in your abilities. Just a basic recognition that you're fundamentally okay, that your existence has inherent value, that you don't need to earn your right to be here. Most people never develop this because they've been taught to look for worth in all the wrong places. In achievement, in approval, in comparison, in performance. These things can provide temporary satisfaction, but they can't provide stable worth, because they're all conditional. They all depend on things staying a certain way, on circumstances cooperating, on others responding favorably. And life doesn't work that way. Circumstances change. Others disappoint. Performance fluctuates. If your worth depends on these things, you'll spend your entire life on unstable ground. The alternative isn't to stop caring about achievement or approval. It's to recognize that these things are additions to your life, not the foundation of it. They can enhance your experience, but they don't create your value. Your value was there before them and will remain after them. This recognition frees you to engage with life differently. Not from a place of need, but from a place of sufficiency. Not trying to become okay, but acting from already being okay. This is where self-worth comes from. Not from what you do, but from what you are. Not from others' evaluations, but from your own recognition. Not from evidence, but from simple presence. It's always been there, underneath all the noise. The work isn't creating it. The work is removing everything that obscures it. All the conditions you've placed on your okayness. All the ways you've made your value dependent on things that have nothing to do with your value. All the voices that told you that you need to earn what was already yours. When you begin to remove these obstacles, something emerges. Not something new, but something that was always there. A quiet knowing that you're enough. Not better than anyone else, not worse than anyone else. Just enough, just as you are, right now. This knowing doesn't shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. And from this place, everything else becomes possible. Not because you've finally achieved enough to deserve peace, but because you've recognized that peace was never something you needed to achieve. It was always available, waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere and recognize what was already present. There's something else that needs to be said about where self-worth comes from, something that often gets overlooked in these conversations. Self-worth isn't just about removing false beliefs or changing your thinking. It's about developing a different relationship with the entirety of your experience. Most people have been taught to divide their experiences into acceptable and unacceptable categories. The parts of themselves they can show and the parts they need to hide. The emotions that are reasonable and the emotions that make them weak. The thoughts that prove they're good people and the thoughts that prove they're damaged. This division creates an exhausting internal situation. You're constantly monitoring yourself, making sure the unacceptable parts don't leak out, trying to amplify the acceptable parts. You present a curated version of yourself to the world, and sometimes even to yourself. The parts that don't fit the acceptable image get pushed down, denied, explained away. You tell yourself you shouldn't feel certain things, shouldn't want certain things, shouldn't struggle with certain things. And each time you reject a part of your experience, you fracture your sense of self a little more. Real self-worth includes all of it. The parts you're proud of and the parts you're ashamed of. The moments you handled well and the moments you didn't. The feelings that make sense and the feelings that seem irrational. When you can hold your entire experience without constantly judging it, without needing parts of it to be different, something settles inside. You stop spending energy maintaining the division between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. This doesn't mean you act on every impulse or express every thought. It means you can acknowledge what's true internally without making it mean something terrible about you. You can notice anger without believing you're a bad person. You can feel insecurity without deciding you're fundamentally flawed. You can want things that seem selfish without condemning yourself. The feelings exist. The thoughts exist. They're part of your human experience. Rejecting them doesn't make them go away. It just makes you more fragmented. Most people have spent years trying to become someone they think they should be instead of working with who they actually are. They have an image of the person they believe would be worthy, lovable, acceptable, and they're constantly measuring themselves against that image. Every deviation feels like failure. Every trait that doesn't match the ideal feels like something to fix. But the image isn't you. It's a construction, an idea, a standard you've absorbed from various sources and internalized as the requirement for worth. The irony is that the more you try to match the image, the more disconnected you become from yourself. Because the image is static and you're not. The image is simple and you're complex. The image is what you think you should be and you are what you are. There's no version of self-worth that comes from successfully performing an identity that isn't actually yours. That's just a more sophisticated version of the same approval-seeking pattern, except now you're seeking approval from an internalized authority that's even harsher than external ones. What happens when you stop trying to be the image and start working with what's actually here? You might discover that you're different than you thought. That you want different things than you believed you wanted. That you have capacities you didn't know about and limitations you've been denying. This discovery can be disorienting at first, because it requires releasing the familiar story about who you are. But it's also the only path to actual stability, because it's based on truth rather than construction. This process of self-discovery isn't comfortable. You'll encounter aspects of yourself you don't particularly like. Patterns you wish weren't there. Reactions you'd rather not have. The impulse will be to judge these things, to immediately move into fixing mode, to reject what you find. But the practice is to simply see. To notice without immediately evaluating. To allow what's there to be there without making it mean you're fundamentally broken. There's a specific kind of gentleness required here that most people have never extended to themselves. Not the forced gentleness of positive thinking, but a genuine willingness to be with yourself as you are. To meet your own experience with curiosity rather than condemnation. To investigate how you actually feel instead of how you think you should feel. To acknowledge what you actually want instead of what you believe you're supposed to want. This gentleness isn't weakness and it isn't indulgence. It's clarity. When you can see yourself clearly, without the constant interference of judgment, you can make actual choices about what to change and what to accept. You can work with your patterns instead of against them. You can use your energy for growth rather than for maintaining an acceptable facade. But this only becomes possible when you stop treating parts of yourself as enemies that need to be defeated. The relationship you have with yourself in private, when no one is watching, when there's no performance required, this is the soil in which self-worth either grows or withers. If that relationship is characterized by constant criticism, harsh judgment, rejection of your experience, your sense of worth will remain fragile no matter what you achieve externally. But if that relationship can become one of basic acceptance, of willingness to see what's true, of recognition that your complexity doesn't diminish your value, something fundamental shifts. This shift doesn't happen because you decide to think differently. It happens through repeated choices to meet yourself differently.
Each time you notice self-judgment and choose curiosity instead.
Each time you feel something uncomfortable and allow it instead of immediately trying to make it go away. Each time you acknowledge a truth about yourself that doesn't match your preferred image. These small moments of honest presence with yourself accumulate into something larger. What they accumulate into is a sense of being on your own side. Not in a defensive way, not in a way that refuses accountability or growth, but in a fundamental way that recognizes you're doing your best with what you have in each moment.
Even when your best isn't very good. Even when you make mistakes.
Even when you fall short of your own standards. You're still on your own side, still willing to be with yourself, still recognizing your basic value beneath all the variable performance.
This isn't something you can fake. You know whether you're actually on your own side or whether you're just trying to be. You know whether you genuinely accept your complexity or whether you're still fighting it while pretending not to. The work is to notice where you're still rejecting yourself, where you're still making your okayness conditional, where you're still believing that parts of you are unacceptable. And then, gradually, to release those conditions. The release doesn't usually feel dramatic. It's more like a quiet letting go.
A recognition that you've been holding yourself to standards that don't actually serve you.
That you've been fighting battles that don't need to be fought.
That you've been treating yourself like a problem to be solved when you're actually a person to be known.
This recognition changes the entire orientation of your inner life. From this different orientation, self-worth becomes less abstract. It's not something you need to believe in despite evidence.
It's something you experience directly through the quality of your relationship with yourself. When you can be present with your own experience without constant judgment, you feel your worth. When you can acknowledge your struggles without making them mean something terrible about you, you feel your worth. When you can pursue growth without believing you're currently inadequate, you feel your worth. This felt sense of worth is what actually sustains you through difficulty. Not the intellectual belief that you should value yourself, but the lived experience of being fundamentally okay with who you are. This experience becomes your foundation, the ground you stand on regardless of what's happening externally. And from this foundation, you can engage with life from a place of sufficiency rather than deficit, from wholeness rather than lack, from peace rather than desperation.
Chapter 3: Emotional Independence.
You've probably noticed how much of your emotional state depends on how others respond to you. Someone ignores your message and you feel uncertain.
Someone criticizes your work and your entire day shifts. Someone seems distant and you immediately start questioning what you did wrong. This isn't unusual.
Most people live this way, their internal experience rising and falling based on external reactions. But there's something worth examining in this pattern, something that reveals where your sense of stability actually lives. When your emotional state depends primarily on others' responses, you're essentially giving them control over your inner experience. Not because they're trying to control you, but because you've structured your internal world in a way that makes their reactions significant to your sense of okayness.
This creates a vulnerability that most people don't fully recognize until it becomes problematic.
You can't control how others respond. You can influence it, certainly, but you can't control it. And when your internal stability depends on something you can't control, you're going to spend a lot of time feeling unstable.
Emotional independence doesn't mean not caring what others think. It doesn't mean isolating yourself or pretending relationships don't matter.
It means developing a center of gravity inside yourself that remains steady regardless of how others respond to you.
This center isn't something you build through willpower or positive thinking.
It emerges when you stop making others' reactions the primary source of information about your worth.
Most people have been trained to read others constantly.
To monitor facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, looking for signs of approval or disapproval.
This monitoring becomes so automatic that you might not even notice you're doing it. But pay attention in your next conversation. Notice how much of your attention is on the other person's reactions rather than on what you're actually trying to communicate. Notice how quickly you adjust based on what you perceive in their response.
Notice how their mood affects your mood, how their energy shifts your energy.
This responsiveness isn't inherently problematic.
Being attuned to others is part of how relationships work. The problem emerges when you have no separation between their experience and yours.
When their disapproval doesn't just inform you but destabilizes you.
When their mood doesn't just affect the interaction but determines your internal state.
When you can't tell the difference between someone having a bad day and someone rejecting you personally.
This lack of separation creates constant confusion. You're never quite sure if what you're feeling is actually yours or if you're just absorbing what's around you.
Someone is upset and you feel responsible even when you didn't do anything wrong. Someone is distant and you feel rejected even when their distance has nothing to do with you. Someone is critical and you feel fundamentally flawed even when the criticism is about a specific situation. You've lost the ability to distinguish between information and verdict. The pattern becomes especially clear around rejection.
When someone doesn't want what you're offering, whether it's a relationship, a professional opportunity, or just your company in a given moment, most people experience this as a statement about their fundamental value.
The rejection feels personal even when it isn't.
Even when the other person's choice is based on their own needs, preferences, circumstances, it still lands as if it means something definitive about you.
But rejection is just information about fit. Someone not wanting a relationship with you doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means they're not available, not interested, not compatible, or not ready. Someone not hiring you doesn't mean you're incompetent.
It means they chose differently, for reasons that may have nothing to do with your actual abilities.
Someone declining your invitation doesn't mean they don't value you.
It means they have other priorities in that moment. The ability to receive rejection without making it a statement about your worth is one of the most liberating skills you can develop.
It requires understanding that other people's choices are about them, not about you. They're making decisions based on their needs, their preferences, their circumstances.
Even when they say the rejection is about you, what they're really saying is that what you offer doesn't match what they're looking for.
That's information about compatibility, not a judgment of your value. This distinction matters enormously.
When you can hold rejection as information rather than verdict, it stops having the power to devastate you.
You can feel disappointed without feeling destroyed.
You can adjust your approach without questioning your fundamental worth. You can recognize that not being chosen in this situation doesn't mean anything about your broader value or your future possibilities. But making this shift requires releasing something most people hold tightly.
The belief that if you're good enough, valuable enough, lovable enough, you won't be rejected. This belief sets up an impossible equation.
Because rejection happens to everyone, regardless of their worth. Some of the most talented people you know have been rejected for opportunities. Some of the most attractive people you know have been rejected romantically.
Some of the most capable people you know have been turned down for positions. Rejection isn't evidence of inadequacy.
It's evidence of being human and putting yourself in situations where others make choices.
The fear of rejection often causes more suffering than actual rejection.
You might avoid pursuing opportunities because you don't want to face the possibility of being turned down.
You might stay in situations that don't serve you because leaving would require risking rejection.
You might not express what you really want because you're afraid others won't respond favorably. This prevention strategy seems protective, but it actually keeps you trapped in a smaller version of your life. When you develop emotional independence, rejection becomes less frightening because your internal stability doesn't depend on being chosen.
You can pursue what matters to you knowing that not everyone will respond positively, and that's okay. Their response doesn't determine your worth.
It just determines whether this particular connection, opportunity, or interaction is going to happen.
There will be others. There are always others. There's another pattern that erodes emotional independence in subtle ways. Comparison. You probably do this more than you realize.
You see what others have, what they've achieved, how they present themselves, and you measure yourself against them.
Sometimes you come out ahead in the comparison and feel good. More often you come out behind and feel inadequate.
Either way, you're using others as the standard for evaluating yourself. This comparison habit is deeply ingrained in most people. You learned early that there were rankings, hierarchies, ways of determining who was better or worse. School reinforced this with grades and competitions. Social environments reinforced it with popularity and status. Work environments reinforce it with promotions and recognition. Everywhere you look, there are systems that encourage you to measure yourself against others. But comparison is fundamentally flawed as a method for understanding your worth. Because worth isn't relative. Your value doesn't increase because someone else has less. It doesn't decrease because someone else has more. You can be less skilled than someone in a particular area and still be valuable. You can be more accomplished than someone and not be more valuable. These are different categories entirely, but comparison treats them as if they're the same. When you compare yourself to others, you're usually comparing your internal experience to their external presentation. You know all your doubts, struggles, failures, and uncertainties. You see their curated version, the face they show to the world. This creates a distorted comparison where you always seem lacking, because you're comparing your messy reality to their polished appearance. But everyone has the messy reality. Everyone struggles. Everyone has doubts. You just don't see that part in others the way you see it in yourself. The comparison trap also keeps you focused on the wrong questions. Instead of asking what you actually want, you're asking whether you have what others have. Instead of evaluating whether something serves you, you're evaluating whether it makes you look good relative to others. Instead of building the life that fits you, you're trying to achieve the markers that signal success in comparison. This takes you further and further from yourself. Emotional independence requires releasing the comparison habit, at least as a method for determining your worth. You can notice what others are doing without making it mean something about you. You can appreciate others' achievements without feeling diminished. You can acknowledge areas where others are more skilled without it threatening your sense of value. Because your value isn't determined by where you rank. It exists independent of comparison. This release doesn't happen through effort. You can't force yourself to stop comparing. The more you try, the more you reinforce the pattern. Instead, it happens through awareness. Each time you notice yourself comparing, you have a choice. You can follow the comparison down the familiar path of feeling either superior or inferior. Or you can notice what you're doing and redirect your attention to what's actually relevant. What do I want? What matters to me? What am I building? These questions take you back to yourself, away from the distortion of comparison. Building emotional independence ultimately means developing what you might call an internal reference system. This is a way of evaluating your life based on your own values, needs, and priorities rather than on external standards or others' reactions. Most people don't have this. They have external reference systems, where they look outside themselves for information about whether they're doing well, whether they're on the right path, whether they're okay. An external reference system isn't inherently wrong. You need information from the world. Feedback matters. Others' perspectives can be valuable. But when the external references are your only references, you have no stable ground. You're always adjusting based on what you're receiving from outside, never quite sure what you actually think or feel because you've been so focused on what others think or feel. An internal reference system means you have your own standards, your own sense of what matters, your own way of evaluating whether something is working for you. These aren't arbitrary or disconnected from reality. They're developed through attention to your actual experience, your actual values, your actual needs. They're refined through reflection, through noticing what actually serves you versus what you think should serve you. They become a stable foundation that allows you to receive external feedback without being destabilized by it. Developing this internal reference system takes time. You've spent years learning to look outside yourself for validation, for direction, for confirmation that you're okay. Turning that attention inward feels strange at first. You might not trust what you find there. You might question whether your internal sense is accurate or whether you're just making excuses. This doubt is normal. It's part of the process of learning to trust yourself.
The practice is to start asking yourself questions and actually listening to your answers. Not the answers you think you should give, but the answers that are actually true. How do I actually feel about this? What do I actually want here? Does this actually serve me? Is this actually aligned with what matters to me? These questions direct your attention inward, toward your own experience, your own truth. At first, you might not have clear answers. You've been so focused on what others think that you've lost touch with what you think. That's okay. The clarity develops through practice. Each time you check in with yourself, each time you prioritize your internal experience over external approval, you strengthen your internal reference system. You begin to know yourself better. You begin to trust that knowing. This trust in yourself is what emotional independence ultimately rests on. Not trust that you'll always be right or never make mistakes, but trust that you can handle your own experience, make your own decisions, evaluate your own life without needing constant external validation. You become your own primary source of stability, and others' reactions become secondary. Important, yes. Informative, yes. But not determinative of your fundamental okayness. From this place of internal stability, your relationships actually improve. When you're not desperately seeking approval, you can connect more genuinely. When you're not devastated by rejection, you can be more honest about what you want. When you're not constantly comparing, you can appreciate others without feeling threatened. When you have your own internal reference system, you can receive feedback without it destabilizing your sense of self. You become more resilient, more authentic, more present. This resilience doesn't mean nothing bothers you. It means that when things bother you, you don't collapse. You feel the feeling, you process the experience, but your foundation remains. You can be disappointed without being destroyed. You can be hurt without believing you're fundamentally damaged. You can face difficulty without questioning your entire worth. The emotional waves come and go, but underneath them is something steady that doesn't depend on circumstances aligning in your favor. That steadiness is emotional independence. Not isolation, not indifference, but a quiet center that remains regardless of how others respond to you. A place inside that knows you're okay even when others suggest you're not. A stability that allows you to engage fully with life without your sense of self constantly hanging in the balance. This is what becomes possible when you stop making others' reactions the primary determinant of your internal experience and start building something that originates from within. There's a particular moment that reveals whether you've developed genuine emotional independence or whether you're still operating from a place of hidden dependence. It's the moment when someone whose opinion matters to you expresses disappointment, disagreement, or disapproval. Not casual acquaintances, but people you respect, people you care about, people whose perspective carries weight in your life. When they question your choices or express concern about your direction, what happens inside you? If your first response is an internal scramble to defend yourself, to explain, to make them understand so they'll approve again, that's revealing something. If their doubt creates immediate doubt in you, if their concern makes you question everything you thought you knew, if their disapproval feels unbearable, you're still giving them authority over your internal experience. This doesn't mean you're failing at emotional independence. It means you're seeing clearly where the work still needs to happen. The path to emotional independence isn't about becoming immune to others' opinions. It's about developing the capacity to hold their perspective alongside your own without immediately abandoning yourself. You can hear their concern without making it more valid than your own sense of things. You can consider their viewpoint without automatically assuming they're right and you're wrong. You can value their input without needing their approval to proceed. This capacity develops through practice in small moments. Each time someone questions you and you feel that familiar pull to abandon your own knowing in favor of their certainty, you have a choice point. You can follow the old pattern of immediately doubting yourself, or you can pause. You can acknowledge their perspective while also staying connected to your own. You can say internally, maybe even externally, I hear what you're saying, and I'm choosing differently. Not defensively, not with hostility, but with quiet clarity. Most people avoid these confrontations entirely. They either hide their true choices from people who might disapprove,
or they simply don't make choices that might generate disapproval. They stay within the boundaries of what others will accept, what others will understand, what others will support. This seems like it prevents conflict, but what it actually does is prevent you from living according to your own sense of what's right for you. You're managing others' comfort at the expense of your own development. Emotional independence requires a willingness to disappoint people. Not as a goal, not as something you pursue, but as something you accept as an inevitable consequence of living according to your own internal reference system. Your choices won't always make sense to others. Your priorities won't always align with what people expect from you. Your path won't always look like what others think it should look like. And that's not a problem to be solved. It's simply what happens when you stop outsourcing your decision-making to external approval. The fear of disappointing others runs deeper than most people realize. It's not just about wanting to be liked or avoiding conflict. It's often connected to early experiences where love felt conditional, where approval seemed to depend on meeting others' expectations. If disappointing people in your past meant risking rejection or withdrawal of care, then disappointing people now triggers that same ancient fear. Your adult self knows intellectually that disagreement doesn't mean abandonment, but the emotional system hasn't caught up yet. Healing this requires you to actually experience that disapproval doesn't destroy you. You have to feel someone's disappointment and notice that you survive it. You have to make a choice others don't support and discover that you can handle their reaction. You have to stand in your own truth even when others question it and find that your foundation holds. This isn't something you can think your way through. It requires lived experience of your own stability in the face of others' doubt. Each time you do this, each time you maintain your center while others react, you're building evidence for a new belief. The belief that you can be okay even when others aren't okay with your choices. That their disapproval is information about their perspective, not a verdict on your worth or your path. That you can care about their opinion without being controlled by it. That their comfort is not more important than your integrity. This doesn't make you rigid or closed to feedback. In fact, it makes you more open, because you're not receiving feedback as a threat to your foundation. You can actually consider what others are saying without immediately becoming defensive or collapsing into doubt. You can take what's useful and leave what isn't. You can adjust your approach based on new information without feeling like you were fundamentally wrong. You can admit mistakes without it meaning you're a mistake. The difference between healthy consideration of others' input and dependence on their approval is subtle but significant. Healthy consideration means you gather information, including others' perspectives, and then make decisions based on what seems true and right to you. Dependence means you need others to agree with you before you can trust your own judgment. Healthy consideration means feedback informs your thinking. Dependence means feedback determines your thinking. You'll know you're moving toward genuine emotional independence when you notice you can be in relationships without constantly monitoring for signs of approval or disapproval. When you can have a conversation without mentally tracking whether the other person likes what you're saying. When you can make a choice without immediately checking whether others support it. When you can sit with someone's disappointment without needing to fix it or defend yourself. When you can receive criticism without it destabilizing your sense of self. This shift creates a different quality of presence. When you're not constantly monitoring for external validation, you're actually available for genuine connection. You can listen to others without filtering everything through how it affects your status in their eyes. You can be honest without calculating whether honesty will cost you approval. You can show up as you actually are rather than as who you think others need you to be. This authenticity doesn't come from deciding to be authentic. It comes from no longer being dependent on others' reactions to feel fundamentally okay. What emerges from this place is a quiet confidence that has nothing to do with bravado or performance. It's simply the confidence that comes from knowing yourself, trusting your internal compass, and being willing to navigate based on your own sense of direction even when others question the route. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not defending anything. You're just living from your own center, responsive to others but not determined by them, connected but not dependent, engaged but not desperate. This is what emotional independence actually feels like in practice.
Not dramatic, not defiant, just steady. Chapter 4: Building an Unshakable Self. There is a particular kind of strength that emerges not from what you defend, but from what you no longer need to justify. It lives in the quiet space between stimulus and response, in the moment when someone expects you to bend and you simply stand. This strength is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply is. And it begins with understanding that your value as a person exists independently of how others choose to treat you. When you set a boundary, you are not building a wall against the world. You are making a statement about reality. You are saying, this is where I end and you begin. This is what I will accept and what I will not. This is the level of respect I require, not because I demand it through force, but because I embody it through presence. The act of setting a boundary is not an act of aggression. It is an act of clarification. You are simply making visible what was always true, that you are a separate person with separate needs, and that honoring those needs is not selfishness but self-recognition. Many people confuse boundaries with rigidity. You are testing whether they can accept you as a whole person with your own needs, or whether they require you to remain small, pliable, and self-negating. This is not a test you administer consciously. It is simply what happens when you stop performing. Some people will accept your no with grace. Others will react with confusion, frustration, or anger. Their reaction tells you something important. It tells you whether they were relating to you as a person or as a function. There is a psychology to the word no that goes deeper than mere refusal. When you say no, you are engaging in an act of self-definition. You are drawing a line in the space of your life and saying, this is mine. This time, this energy, this part of me is not available for your use. And in that moment, you reclaim something essential. You reclaim the sense that you have agency, that you are not simply a vessel for the needs and wants of others, that your internal experience matters. Many people never learn to say no because they never learned that their internal experience matters. They learned the opposite. They learned that what matters is keeping others comfortable, keeping others happy, keeping the peace. They learned that their role is to absorb, to accommodate, to adjust. And so they developed a kind of permeability, a porousness of self, where other people's needs flowed into them unchecked and their own needs remained unvoiced, often even unrecognized. If this describes you, then learning to say no is not about becoming harsh or unkind. It is about becoming solid. It is about recognizing that you are not required to be endlessly available, endlessly flexible, endlessly self-sacrificing in order to deserve care. You deserve care simply because you exist. Your needs are not less important than anyone else's. Your time is not less valuable. Your energy is not an infinite resource to be distributed without regard for your own well-being. Saying no is an act of self-preservation, but it is also an act of self-respect. When you honor your own limits, you send a message inward that you are worth protecting. You communicate to yourself, at a level deeper than words, that you matter. And over time, this changes something fundamental. It changes the way you relate to your own needs. They stop feeling like burdens or inconveniences. They start feeling like information. They become signals that help you navigate the world with greater clarity and less resentment. But there is another dimension to this that must be understood. Saying no is not only about what you refuse. It is also about what you protect. When you say no to something that drains you, you say yes to something that sustains you. When you decline an invitation that feels wrong, you create space for an opportunity that feels right. The no is not the end. It is the clearing. It is the act of removing what does not belong so that what does belong has room to enter. This is where silent strength begins to reveal itself. Silent strength is not about being unyielding. It is about being unmoved by pressure that does not align with your values. It is the quality of remaining steady when others are trying to shift you, not through stubbornness, but through clarity. You do not argue. You do not justify. You do not defend. You simply state what is true for you and allow that truth to stand. There is immense power in this kind of presence. When you stop explaining yourself, something shifts. You stop giving others the impression that your boundaries are negotiable. You stop inviting debate about what you know to be true for yourself. And in that quiet refusal to engage in endless justification, you communicate something unmistakable. I am not asking for permission. I am informing you of a reality. This does not mean you become cold or dismissive. It means you become clear. You recognize that over-explaining is often a symptom of doubt. When you feel the need to justify your no with a long list of reasons, it is usually because some part of you does not believe you have the right to say no without cause. But you do. You have the right to decline anything that does not feel right for you, and you do not owe anyone a thesis defense of your inner experience. Silent strength is also the ability to tolerate discomfort without rushing to resolve it. When you set a boundary and the other person reacts poorly, there is often an immediate impulse to soothe, to soften, to take it back. This impulse comes from a fear that you have done something wrong, that you are responsible for their emotional state, that maintaining the boundary will cost you the relationship. But here is what you must understand. If maintaining a reasonable boundary costs you a relationship, that relationship was not built on a foundation that could support your well-being. You are not responsible for managing other people's disappointment when you honor your own limits. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And the more you practice tolerating the discomfort that sometimes follows a boundary, the more you realize that most of that discomfort is temporary. People adjust. They recalibrate. They learn that you are not infinitely flexible, and they either respect that or they reveal themselves as unwilling to respect it. Either way, you gain clarity. The silent stance you take when you refuse to engage in arguments about your boundaries is not passivity. It is discernment. It is the recognition that not every challenge requires a response, that not every question deserves an answer, that not every provocation warrants engagement. When someone pushes against your boundary and you remain quiet, you are not being weak. You are being strategic. You are conserving your energy for what matters. You are refusing to be drawn into a battle over something that is not actually up for debate. This kind of silence can be deeply uncomfortable for others, especially for those who are accustomed to you explaining yourself, justifying yourself, making yourself smaller to ease their discomfort. Your silence forces them to sit with their own reaction. It removes the option of pulling you into a negotiation about your right to have limits. And in that removal, you create a boundary that is far more powerful than any argument could ever be. Consider what happens in the moments when you do engage in lengthy justifications. You open a door. You signal that your decision is still being formulated, that it might be subject to revision if the right pressure is applied. You invite the other person to find holes in your reasoning, to present counterarguments, to convince you that your needs are not as important as you think they are. And even if you ultimately hold your ground, you have expended tremendous energy in a battle that never needed to happen. But when you state your boundary and then become still, when you allow silence to be your answer, you close that door. You communicate that the decision has been made, that it is not a rough draft open to editing, that it is a finished statement. And while this may initially be met with frustration or confusion, over time it establishes a new pattern. People learn that pushing will not yield results. They learn that your boundaries are real, not performative. They learn to take you seriously. This is not about being inflexible or unreasonable. It is about recognizing the difference between healthy negotiation and manipulation. In a healthy dynamic, both people state their needs, listen to each other, and work together to find a path that respects both. In a manipulative dynamic, one person states a need and the other person works to dismantle it, to reframe it as unreasonable, to make the first person doubt their own perception. The silent stance protects you from the latter. It refuses to participate in your own dismantling. Consistency is the element that transforms individual acts of boundary setting into an unshakable sense of self. When you set a boundary once and then abandon it under pressure, you teach others that your boundaries are suggestions. You teach them that if they push hard enough, you will give in. But when you hold your boundaries consistently, even when it is uncomfortable, you teach something different. You teach that your words mean something. You teach that you can be taken at your word. And over time, this creates trust. Trust is not only something others place in you, it is also something you place in yourself. Every time you say you will do something and you do it, you build self-trust. Every time you say you will not do something and you hold that line, you build self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of an unshakable self. It is the inner knowing that you will not abandon yourself, that you will not betray your own needs for the comfort of others, that you can rely on yourself to honor what matters to you. This kind of consistency also creates a particular kind of respect from others. People may not always like your boundaries, but they will respect them if you hold them. They will learn that you are not someone who can be manipulated through guilt or pressure. They will learn that engaging with you requires engaging with the reality of who you are, not the fantasy of who they wish you would be. And while this may mean that some people drift away, it also means that the people who remain are people who can handle your wholeness. There is a common fear that setting boundaries will leave you isolated, that if you stop accommodating everyone, you will end up alone. But what actually happens is something different. When you stop attracting people who are drawn to your lack of boundaries, you create space for people who are drawn to your authenticity. You stop collecting relationships based on utility and start building relationships based on mutual respect. And these relationships, while perhaps fewer in number, are deeper, more nourishing, and far more sustainable. The consistency required to build an unshakable self extends beyond how you interact with others. It also involves how you interact with yourself. It means noticing the small ways you abandon your own needs throughout the day. It means catching yourself when you agree to something that does not feel right, when you override your own discomfort to avoid disappointing someone, when you tell yourself that your feelings do not matter as much as keeping the peace. Each time you notice these moments and choose differently, you strengthen something within. You strengthen your capacity to recognize your own worth, to trust your own instincts, to prioritize your own well-being without guilt. And while each individual choice may seem small, they accumulate. They build on one another. They create a new baseline, a new way of being in the world where you are no longer constantly negotiating your right to exist on your own terms. The unshakable self is not built in a single moment. It is built through countless small acts of self-honoring. It is built each time you notice a feeling of discomfort and instead of dismissing it, you ask yourself what it is telling you. It is built each time you recognize that you are saying yes out of obligation and you find the courage to say no. It is built each time you resist the urge to justify your existence and instead simply exist, fully and unapologetically. This process requires a shift in how you view yourself in relation to others. For much of your life, you may have operated from the belief that your value is determined by how much you give, how useful you are, how much you can do for others. But your value is not transactional. It is intrinsic. You do not have to earn the right to take up space. You do not have to prove that you deserve consideration. You deserve it because you are a person, and all people deserve to be treated with basic respect and care. When you truly internalize this, something profound changes. You stop seeking validation from others because you are no longer uncertain about your worth. You stop contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you because you recognize that the right spaces will accommodate your shape. You stop apologizing for having needs because you understand that needs are not weaknesses. They are simply part of being human. The unshakable self is not immune to pain. It is not untouched by rejection or disappointment. But it is not defined by those things either. It can experience hurt without being destroyed by it. It can face loss without losing itself. It can encounter criticism without crumbling. And this resilience comes not from hardening, but from grounding. It comes from being so rooted in your own sense of who you are that external storms, while they may shake you, cannot uproot you. This grounding is cultivated through practices of self-awareness. It is cultivated by paying attention to what you feel, what you need, what you value. It is cultivated by noticing when you are acting from fear and when you are acting from clarity. It is cultivated by asking yourself, in moments of doubt, what would I do if I trusted that I was enough exactly as I am? And then, slowly, carefully, doing that thing. There will be moments when this feels impossible. There will be moments when the pull to revert to old patterns is overwhelming, when saying no feels too risky, when standing firm feels too lonely.
In those moments, remember that building an unshakable self is not about never wavering.
It is about returning. It is about noticing when you have abandoned yourself and choosing to come back.
It is about recognizing that every moment is an opportunity to begin again, to choose differently, to honor yourself a little more fully than you did before.
The strength that comes from consistency is cumulative. Each time you hold a boundary, it becomes slightly easier to hold the next one.
Each time you honor your own needs, it becomes slightly more natural to prioritize them. Each time you refuse to justify your existence, it becomes slightly clearer that you never needed to. And over time, these small accumulations create a shift so profound that you barely recognize the person you used to be, the person who believed that their worth was contingent on the approval of others.
This transformation is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming more fully yourself.
It is about stripping away the layers of conditioning that taught you to betray yourself, to ignore yourself, to prioritize everyone else's comfort over your own integrity. It is about rediscovering the person who exists beneath all of that, the person who knows what they need, who trusts their own judgment, who does not require external validation to feel whole. Your worth is not up for debate. It is not contingent on your performance, your productivity, your agreeability, or your willingness to shrink.
It simply is. And the more you live from this truth, the more unshakable you become.
Not because you are beyond challenge, but because you are grounded in something that cannot be taken from you.
You are grounded in the knowledge that you belong to yourself, and that is enough. Chapter 5: Living with Silent Confidence.
There comes a point in the journey toward an unshakable self when something fundamental shifts.
You stop performing.
You stop curating a version of yourself designed to meet the expectations of whoever happens to be watching. You stop monitoring how you are being received, stop adjusting your words and actions to maximize approval, stop contorting yourself into shapes that do not fit.
This is not a decision you make once.
It is a series of small choices, repeated over time, until they become your natural state. And when this happens, you enter into a way of being that can only be described as silent confidence.
Silent confidence is not about announcing your worth.
It is not about listing your accomplishments or defending your value. It is not about making sure everyone knows how capable you are, how intelligent you are, how deserving you are of respect.
Silent confidence is the absence of the need to do any of those things.
It is the quiet certainty that you are enough, exactly as you are, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. It is the deep internal knowing that your value is not a matter of opinion.
It is not up for vote. It simply is. Most people spend a significant portion of their lives trying to prove something.
They are trying to prove that they are smart enough, capable enough, worthy enough. They are trying to prove that they deserve the job, the relationship, the respect, the space they occupy.
And this constant effort to prove is exhausting.
It is exhausting because it is endless.
No amount of external validation ever fully satisfies the need, because the need is not actually about external validation.
It is about an internal doubt that has never been resolved. When you live from a place of needing to prove yourself, you are always performing. You are always aware of the audience, always calculating how your words and actions will be received, always adjusting to maximize approval.
And in this state, you are not free.
You are bound by the perceptions of others.
You are operating from a script that was written by someone else, following rules that were never meant to serve you. You are living in reaction, not from intention.
The shift away from this begins when you recognize that the need to prove yourself is rooted in a belief that you are not inherently valuable. Somewhere along the way, you internalize the idea that your worth is conditional, that it must be earned, that it can be lost. And once you see this belief clearly, once you recognize it for what it is, a learned pattern rather than an immutable truth, you can begin to question it.
You can begin to ask yourself, what if my worth is not something I need to prove? What if it simply exists, independent of what I do or do not accomplish, independent of how others respond to me? This question is not rhetorical. It is an invitation to explore a different way of relating to yourself.
And when you begin to entertain the possibility that your worth is intrinsic, that it does not need to be defended or demonstrated, something remarkable happens.
the urgency falls away. The constant need to monitor and adjust begins to quiet. You find yourself less preoccupied with how you are being perceived and more present to what is actually happening. You stop living in your head, rehearsing what you will say next, analyzing what you just said, worrying about whether you made the right impression. You start living in the moment, because you are no longer trying to control the moment. You are simply experiencing it. This is the beginning of silent confidence. It is not something you acquire. It is something you uncover. It is what remains when you stop layering yourself with performance, when you stop hiding behind the version of yourself you think the world wants to see. It is your natural state, the state you existed in before you learned that you needed to be different, before you learned that who you are is not enough. Living with silent confidence means that you no longer require external affirmation to feel secure. You no longer scan the room to see if people approve of you. You no longer replay conversations in your mind, dissecting every word to determine whether you said the right thing. You no longer shape your opinions based on what you think will be most acceptable. You simply show up as you are, and you trust that this is sufficient. This does not mean you become indifferent to others. It does not mean you stop caring about the impact you have or the connections you form. It means that your sense of self is no longer contingent on how those connections unfold. You can care deeply about someone and still recognize that their opinion of you does not define you. You can value a relationship and still understand that the relationship does not determine your worth. You can be open to feedback and still know that feedback is information, not a verdict on your value as a person. The internal shift that allows for this kind of presence is profound. It is the shift from seeking to validate your worth to simply inhabiting it. And this shift changes everything. It changes how you speak, how you listen, how you move through the world. When you are not trying to prove anything, you speak with clarity rather than defensiveness. You listen to understand rather than to prepare your response. You move with ease rather than tension. You become more present, more authentic, more accessible, because you are no longer guarding yourself against the possibility that someone might find you lacking. One of the most significant changes that occurs when you stop needing to prove yourself is that you become far less reactive. You no longer take things personally in the way you once did. When someone criticizes you, you can consider whether the criticism has merit without immediately feeling attacked. When someone disagrees with you, you can engage with their perspective without feeling threatened. When someone rejects you, you can acknowledge the disappointment without interpreting the rejection as evidence of your inadequacy. This is because your sense of self is no longer fragile. It is no longer dependent on a constant stream of positive reinforcement. It is grounded in something more stable, something internal. And from this grounded place, you can engage with the world without needing the world to constantly affirm that you are okay. You already know you are okay. The question is not whether you are enough. The question is how you want to engage with what is in front of you. The transformation from external validation to internal grounding is not instantaneous. It unfolds gradually, through repeated experiences of choosing your own sense of self over the judgments of others. Each time you notice the urge to perform and you choose authenticity instead, you strengthen your internal foundation. Each time you feel the pull to justify yourself and you choose silence instead, you reinforce the knowledge that you do not need permission to exist as you are. Each time you encounter criticism and you choose to evaluate it calmly rather than defend against it reflexively, you demonstrate to yourself that your worth is not on trial. Over time, these choices accumulate. They build on one another. And eventually, you find that the old patterns have lost their grip. The need to prove yourself, which once felt so urgent, so consuming, begins to feel foreign. You look back at the person you were, the person who needed constant reassurance, who monitored every interaction for signs of approval or disapproval, who believed that their value could be diminished by someone else's opinion, and you barely recognize them. Not because you have become someone else, but because you have finally become yourself. Silent confidence also transforms the way you relate to your own accomplishments. When you are driven by the need to prove yourself, accomplishments are never quite enough. You achieve something and instead of satisfaction, you feel a fleeting relief followed quickly by the question, what's next? You are never able to fully rest in what you have done because your worth is always conditional, always dependent on the next achievement. But when you live from a place of silent confidence, accomplishments become something different. They become expressions of your interests, your abilities, your choices, rather than evidence of your value. You can take pride in what you do without needing it to define who you are. This shift allows for a kind of freedom that is difficult to describe. It is the freedom to pursue things because they genuinely interest you, rather than because you think they will make you look good. It is the freedom to fail without feeling like a failure. It is the freedom to rest without feeling like you are losing ground. It is the freedom to exist without constantly justifying your existence. The connection between inner peace and outer impact is not always obvious, but it is undeniable. When you are at peace within yourself, when you are no longer driven by the need to prove your worth, you become more effective in the world. This might seem counterintuitive. You might think that the drive to prove yourself is what motivates achievement, and that without it, you would become complacent. But the opposite is true. The need to prove yourself is often a distraction. It pulls your focus away from what actually matters and directs it toward managing perceptions. It makes you reactive rather than intentional. It keeps you caught in a cycle of seeking validation rather than creating value. When you are grounded in your own sense of worth, you are free to act from intention rather than reaction. You are free to pursue what genuinely matters to you rather than what you think will impress others. You are free to take risks, to experiment, to fail, because you are not staking your entire sense of self on every outcome. And this freedom is what allows for real growth, real creativity, real impact. Consider the difference between someone who speaks in a meeting because they have something valuable to contribute and someone who speaks because they need to be seen as valuable. The first person is focused on the content. They are thinking about the problem, the solution, the conversation. The second person is focused on themselves. They are thinking about how they are being perceived, whether they sound intelligent, whether they are making a good impression. And this self-focus, this preoccupation with perception, actually diminishes their effectiveness. It makes them less present, less clear, less able to contribute meaningfully. The same dynamic plays out in every area of life. When you are trying to prove your worth in a relationship, you are not fully present to the relationship. You are monitoring your performance, adjusting your behavior to maximize approval, trying to be the version of yourself you think the other person wants. And in doing so, you lose the opportunity for genuine connection. But when you show up as you are, grounded in your own worth, you create the possibility for something real. You allow the other person to see you, not a performance of you. And you give them the space to show up as they are as well. This is what it means for inner peace to create outer impact. It is not that peace makes you passive. It is that peace makes you present. And presence is what allows for authentic connection, meaningful contribution, and genuine influence. When you are not caught up in defending yourself, proving yourself, or managing how you are perceived, you have access to your full capacity. You can think more clearly, respond more effectively, and engage more deeply. You become more of who you actually are, rather than a diminished version of yourself, constrained by the need to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable. The way your self-worth manifests in your behavior is subtle but pervasive. It shows up in how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you respond to challenges. When you genuinely value yourself, you do not rush to fill silence. You do not over-explain. You do not apologize for things that do not warrant apology. You do not seek permission for choices that are yours to make. You move through the world with a quiet assurance that communicates, without words, that you know your place, that you belong, that you are not asking for validation because you do not need it. This kind of presence is magnetic. It draws people in not because you are trying to impress them, but because you are simply at ease. There is something deeply compelling about someone who is comfortable in their own skin, who is not performing, who is not trying to be anything other than what they are. It creates a sense of safety. It signals that you are not going to demand that others validate you, that you are not going to collapse under the weight of their expectations, that you can be relied upon to remain steady. And yet, silent confidence is not about being noticed. It is not about cultivating a particular image or reputation.
It is entirely possible to live with silent confidence in complete obscurity, never seeking recognition, never needing an audience.
Because silent confidence is not for others. It is for you. It is the internal experience of being at home in yourself, of knowing that you are okay, that you have always been okay, that you will continue to be okay regardless of what unfolds around you. This brings us to the heart of what it means to truly respect yourself. Genuine self-respect is not contingent on circumstances. It is not something you feel only when things are going well, only when you are succeeding, only when others are affirming you. Genuine self-respect is what remains when no one is watching, when no one is applauding, when there is no external reward for honoring yourself. It is the choice you make, again and again, to treat yourself with the care and consideration you would offer to someone you deeply value. True self-respect shows up in the small, private moments. It shows up when you keep a commitment you made to yourself, even though no one else knows about it. It shows up when you speak kindly to yourself in your own mind, even though no one else can hear your thoughts. It shows up when you honor your needs, even though no one else would know if you ignored them. It shows up when you refuse to betray yourself for the approval of others, even when that refusal comes at a cost. These moments are where self-respect is built. Not in the grand gestures, not in the public declarations, but in the quiet, private choices that no one else sees. And the reason these moments matter so much is that they are the proof, to yourself, that your commitment to yourself is real. That it is not performative. That it does not require an audience. That you value yourself not because it looks good or because others expect it, but because you genuinely believe you are worthy of that value. When you live this way, something shifts in your relationship to the world. You stop needing the world to be a certain way in order for you to be okay. You stop needing people to behave a certain way, to treat you a certain way, to recognize you a certain way. You can hope for those things. You can prefer them. But you do not need them. And this distinction is everything. It is the difference between living in a state of dependency, where your well-being is always contingent on factors outside your control, and living in a state of autonomy, where your well-being is grounded in something that cannot be taken from you. This is not about isolation or self-sufficiency in the sense of not needing anyone. Humans are relational beings. We need connection, support, love. But there is a difference between needing connection and needing validation. Connection is about mutual presence, mutual care, mutual respect. Validation is about proving your worth. And when you no longer need validation, you are free to seek connection for its own sake, not as a means to feel okay about yourself. The path to living with silent confidence is not about reaching a destination where you never doubt yourself, never feel uncertain, never struggle. It is about developing a relationship with yourself that is resilient enough to hold those experiences without being defined by them. You can feel doubt and still trust yourself. You can feel uncertain and still move forward. You can struggle and still know that you are capable. Because your sense of self is not dependent on feeling confident all the time. It is rooted in something deeper, the knowledge that you are enough, even when you do not feel like enough. This kind of grounding takes time to develop. It requires you to notice the patterns that pull you away from yourself, the habits of seeking external validation, the impulses to prove your worth, the tendencies to monitor how you are being perceived. And it requires you to gently, consistently, choose differently. To choose to trust yourself when the urge to seek reassurance arises. To choose to honor your needs when the impulse to please others emerges. To choose to remain steady when everything in you wants to react. Each time you make this choice, you reinforce the truth that you are building your life on, that you are inherently valuable, that you do not need to earn your right to exist, that you are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to set boundaries, to be imperfect. And over time, this truth becomes so deeply embedded in how you relate to yourself that it stops being something you have to remind yourself of. It becomes the foundation from which you live. Living from this foundation does not mean you never care what others think. It means that what others think is no longer the primary factor in how you feel about yourself. You can take feedback seriously without taking it personally. You can value relationships without needing them to validate you. You can engage with the world fully, openly, generously, because you are not holding yourself back out of fear that someone will see you and find you lacking. You already know your own worth. The question is not whether you are enough. The question is how you want to show up in this moment, in this interaction, in this situation. And when you show up from a place of silent confidence, you give others permission to do the same. You create an environment where people feel less pressure to perform, less need to prove themselves, because you are not demanding that they validate you. You model what it looks like to be at ease with who you are, and in doing so, you offer a kind of freedom that is rare and valuable. This is the gift of doing your own inner work. It is not just for you. It ripples outward. It affects how you relate to others, how they relate to you, how they relate to themselves. When you stop living in reaction, constantly seeking validation and managing perceptions, you become a steady presence. And steady presences are grounding. They remind others that it is possible to exist without constant performance, without endless striving, without the relentless need to prove. Real self-respect, the kind that exists even when no one is watching, is built through integrity. Integrity is not about being perfect. It is about being consistent. It is about aligning your actions with your values, not because someone is keeping score, but because you are honoring yourself. It is about doing what you said you would do, treating yourself the way you deserve to be treated, holding yourself to standards that reflect genuine care rather than harsh judgment. This kind of integrity is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It simply is. And it is the foundation of an unshakable self. Because when you know that you are living in alignment with your own values, when you know that you are treating yourself with respect even in the moments when no one else would know if you did not, you develop a kind of self-trust that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. You know that you will not abandon yourself. You know that you will not betray your own needs for the approval of others. You know that you will not compromise your integrity for convenience. And this knowledge, this deep inner certainty, is what allows you to move through the world with confidence that is not dependent on anything outside of you. The closing truth of this journey is simple but profound. Real self-respect is not about how you present yourself to the world. It is not about the image you project or the reputation you cultivate. It is about how you treat yourself when no one is watching. It is about whether you honor yourself in the small, private moments. It is about whether you keep your commitments to yourself, whether you speak to yourself with kindness, whether you prioritize your well-being even when no one else would know if you did not. This is the measure of genuine self-respect. Not how you appear, but how you live. Not what others see, but what you know to be true about yourself. Not the validation you receive, but the value you recognize within yourself, independent of any external affirmation. When you live this way, you become unshakable. Not because you are beyond hurt or disappointment, but because you are grounded in something that cannot be taken from you. You are grounded in the knowledge that you belong to yourself, that your worth is intrinsic, that you are enough exactly as you are. And from this place of grounding, you can engage with the world fully, openly, courageously, because you are no longer protecting a fragile sense of self. You are simply being who you are, and trusting that this is, and has always been, enough. Conclusion: the return to yourself. You have arrived at the end of this book, but not at the end of the journey. The work of building an unshakable self is not something you complete and then set aside. It is a practice, a way of being, a continuous return to what is true. And what is true is this: your worth has never been contingent on how others treat you, how much you achieve, or how well you perform. It has always existed, whole and complete, waiting for you to recognize it. Everything you have read up to this point has been an invitation to that recognition. An invitation to see that the frantic effort to prove yourself, to earn love, to justify your existence, has always been unnecessary. You were never lacking. You were never insufficient. You were simply taught to believe that you were, and you spent years trying to compensate for a deficiency that never actually existed. The journey toward an unshakable self is, in many ways, a journey of unlearning. It is the process of dismantling the beliefs that were installed in you before you had the capacity to question them. Beliefs about what makes a person valuable. Beliefs about what you need to do to deserve care.
Beliefs about the conditions under which you are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to say no.
These beliefs were not chosen by you.
They were absorbed, often unconsciously, from the environments you grew up in, the relationships you witnessed, the messages you received about who you were supposed to be. And for a long time, you may have lived as though these beliefs were facts. You may have structured your entire life around them, making choices designed to meet standards that were never yours, pursuing goals that were meant to prove something that should never have been in question. You may have exhausted yourself trying to be enough, never quite succeeding because the target kept moving, because no amount of external achievement could fill an internal void that was created by the absence of self-recognition. But at some point, something shifted. Maybe it was a moment of clarity, a sudden realization that the way you were living was not sustainable. Maybe it was a gradual accumulation of experiences that no longer made sense, patterns that stopped working, relationships that revealed their true nature. Maybe it was simply exhaustion, a deep fatigue that came from decades of trying to be someone you were not. Whatever the catalyst, you began to question. You began to wonder whether the beliefs you had been living by were actually true, whether the rules you had been following were actually serving you, whether the person you had been trying to become was actually who you wanted to be. That questioning is where everything begins. It is the first crack in a foundation that was never solid to begin with. And once you start questioning, you cannot stop. You begin to see the ways you have betrayed yourself. The times you said yes when you meant no. The moments you silenced your own needs to accommodate someone else's. The relationships you stayed in long past the point when they stopped nourishing you. The versions of yourself you performed to gain approval. The parts of yourself you hid because you were afraid they would not be acceptable. And seeing all of this can be painful. It can bring up grief, anger, regret. You may feel a sense of loss for the years you spent living in accordance with beliefs that diminished you. You may feel frustration at the people who taught you those beliefs, who benefited from your compliance, who never questioned whether the standards they held you to were reasonable or kind. You may feel sadness for the younger version of yourself who did not know that another way was possible, who believed that the only path to safety was self-abandonment. All of these feelings are valid. They are part of the process. But they are not the end. The end is not bitterness or resentment. The end is freedom. The end is the recognition that you do not have to live that way anymore. That you can choose differently. That you can begin, right now, to build a relationship with yourself that is based on respect rather than criticism, on acceptance rather than judgment, on care rather than neglect. This rebuilding is not about becoming a different person. It is about becoming more fully yourself. It is about stripping away the layers of conditioning that taught you to be less than you are, smaller than you are, quieter than you are. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that you learned to hide, the needs you learned to ignore, the boundaries you learned to suppress. It is about returning to a state of wholeness that was always your birthright but that you were taught to earn. The process of return is both simple and difficult. It is simple because the truth is straightforward. You are inherently valuable, you deserve to be treated with respect, your needs matter, you are allowed to take up space. It is difficult because living in alignment with this truth requires you to go against years of conditioning. It requires you to disappoint people who have grown accustomed to your compliance. It requires you to tolerate discomfort, uncertainty, and the fear that comes with stepping outside of familiar patterns. It requires you to trust yourself when you have been taught to doubt yourself. It requires you to prioritize yourself when you have been taught that doing so is selfish. But the difficulty is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are doing something necessary. Growth is uncomfortable. Change is disorienting. And the transition from living for others to living for yourself will inevitably bring up resistance, both from within and from without. But on the other side of that resistance is a life that feels fundamentally different. A life where you are no longer constantly monitoring how you are being received. A life where you are no longer exhausting yourself trying to meet impossible standards. A life where you are no longer waiting for permission to exist as you are. One of the most profound shifts that occurs as you build an unshakable self is the shift in your relationship to other people's opinions. For much of your life, those opinions may have felt like verdicts. They may have felt like they determined your worth, your value, your acceptability. And so you lived in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for signs of approval or disapproval, constantly adjusting to maximize the former and minimize the latter. You gave other people tremendous power over your internal state, and in doing so, you made yourself dependent on their validation. But as you develop a grounded sense of self, as you begin to recognize your own worth independent of external affirmation, those opinions lose their power. They become information rather than verdicts. You can consider them without being controlled by them. You can hear feedback without internalizing it as a statement about your fundamental value. You can recognize when someone's opinion reflects their own limitations, their own biases, their own unmet needs, rather than an objective truth about who you are. This does not mean you become indifferent to others. It does not mean you stop caring about the impact you have or the connections you form. It means that you are no longer held hostage by the need for universal approval. You recognize that you cannot please everyone, that trying to do so will only result in losing yourself, and that the people whose opinions truly matter are the people who see you clearly and value you fully, not the people who require you to be something other than what you are. The people who remain in your life as you become more solid, more boundaried, more yourself, are the people who are always capable of relating to you as a whole person. They are the people who do not need you to be small in order for them to feel comfortable. They are the people who can tolerate your no, who can respect your limits, who can appreciate your authenticity. And the relationships you build with these people are fundamentally different from the relationships you built when you were performing. They are deeper, more honest, more reciprocal, because they are not based on one person giving endlessly while the other takes. They are based on mutual respect, mutual care, mutual recognition of each other's inherent worth. As you continue on this path, you will notice that the way you move through the world changes. You carry yourself differently. You speak differently. You make decisions differently. There is a quality of ease that was not there before, a sense that you are no longer fighting against yourself, no longer constantly second-guessing, no longer exhausting yourself with internal debates about whether you have the right to want what you want or need what you need. You simply know. And from that knowing, you act. This does not mean you never feel doubt. It does not mean you are always certain. It means that doubt and uncertainty are no longer catastrophic. They are simply part of the human experience. You can sit with not knowing without needing to immediately resolve it. You can feel unsure without interpreting it as evidence of your inadequacy. You can make a choice, see how it unfolds, and adjust if needed, without treating every decision as though your entire worth is on the line. This kind of inner steadiness creates a life that feels spacious rather than constricted. You are no longer living in reaction, constantly adjusting to the demands and expectations of others. You are living from intention, making choices that align with your values, your needs, your sense of what matters. And while this does not eliminate difficulty or challenge, it changes your relationship to those things. You are no longer overwhelmed by them. You meet them with a kind of resilience that comes from knowing that you can handle what comes, not because you are invincible, but because you trust yourself to navigate whatever unfolds. The unshakable self is not a fortress. It is not a wall built to keep the world out. It is a foundation. It is the solid ground you stand on, the internal reference point you return to, the quiet certainty that you are okay even when circumstances are not. And from this foundation, you can engage with the world more fully, more openly, more generously than you ever could when you were constantly defending yourself, constantly proving yourself, constantly trying to earn your right to exist. There is a particular kind of peace that comes from no longer needing to be anything other than what you are. It is not the peace of having everything figured out. It is not the peace of a life free from challenge or difficulty. It is the peace of being at home in yourself. The peace of knowing that you do not have to perform, do not have to pretend, do not have to shrink or expand to fit someone else's expectations. You can simply be. And in that being, there is a freedom that is difficult to describe but unmistakable once you experience it. This peace is what allows you to extend genuine compassion to others. When you are no longer caught up in defending your own worth, when you are no longer exhausting yourself trying to prove that you are enough, you have capacity for others in a way you did not before. You can see them more clearly. You can listen more deeply. You can hold space for their struggles without feeling threatened by them. Because their struggles are not a reflection on you. Their needs are not an imposition on you. Their pain is not something you need to fix in order to feel okay about yourself. This is the difference between helping from a place of obligation and helping from a place of choice. When you are grounded in your own worth, you can choose to support others without losing yourself. You can give without depleting yourself. You can care without becoming enmeshed. And the care you offer from this place is more genuine, more sustainable, more respectful, because it does not come with the unspoken expectation that the other person will validate you in return. As you live more consistently from this grounded place, you will find that the external markers of success begin to matter less. Not because you stop caring about your work, your relationships, your contributions, but because those things are no longer the source of your worth. They are expressions of who you are, not evidence of whether you are enough. And this shift allows you to engage with them more freely, more creatively, more authentically, because you are no longer burdened by the need for them to prove something. You can pursue a goal because it genuinely interests you, not because you think achieving it will finally make you feel worthy. You can take a risk because you are curious about what might happen, not because you need the outcome to validate you. You can fail without it shattering you, because failure is simply information about what did not work, not a statement about your fundamental value. And you can succeed without needing to cling to the success, because your sense of self is not dependent on maintaining it. This way of being is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It is something you practice. There will be days when you forget. There will be moments when old patterns resurface, when you find yourself seeking validation, when you catch yourself performing, when you notice that you have abandoned yourself in some small or large way. And in those moments, the practice is not to berate yourself. The practice is to notice. To recognize what has happened without judgment. And to gently, with compassion, return to what is true. The return is always available. You do not have to be perfect at this. You do not have to maintain unwavering confidence at all times. You do not have to never doubt yourself, never seek reassurance, never feel uncertain. You simply have to be willing to come back. To remember that your worth is not contingent. To reconnect with the knowing that you are enough. To choose, once again, to honor yourself even when it is difficult. Over time, the returns become more frequent than the departures. The moments of grounded clarity become more common than the moments of desperate seeking. The sense of being at home in yourself becomes more familiar than the sense of needing to prove yourself. And while the work is never fully finished, it becomes lighter. It becomes less of a struggle and more of a gentle recalibration. It becomes the background hum of your life rather than a constant battle. What you are building is not just a different way of thinking. It is a different way of being. It is a way of moving through the world that is grounded in your own worth, that does not require constant external validation, that can tolerate discomfort without collapsing, that can hold boundaries without guilt, that can pursue what matters without needing it to define you. It is a way of being that allows you to show up fully, to engage authentically, to connect deeply, because you are no longer protecting a fragile sense of self. You are simply living from the truth of who you are. And who you are is enough. Not because you have proven it. Not because you have earned it. Not because anyone has validated it. But because it is simply, fundamentally, unchangeably true. Your worth is intrinsic. It was never dependent on how others treated you. It was never contingent on your accomplishments. It was never determined by your ability to meet impossible standards. It has always been there, whole and complete, waiting for you to recognize it. The recognition of your inherent worth is not the end of your growth. It is the beginning. It is the foundation from which everything else becomes possible. When you are no longer spending your energy trying to prove that you deserve to exist, you have energy for everything else. For creativity, for connection, for contribution, for joy. For living a life that is truly yours, shaped by your values, your interests, your sense of what matters, rather than by the expectations of others.
This is what it means to have an unshakable self. Not that you are beyond challenge or change. Not that you never feel uncertain or afraid. But that beneath all of that, there is a foundation that holds. A knowing that you are okay. A trust that you can handle what comes. A recognition that your worth is not on trial, not up for debate, not dependent on circumstances. It simply is. And from that foundation, you can live differently. You can speak your truth without needing it to be met with approval. You can set boundaries without needing to justify them. You can pursue what matters to you without needing it to impress anyone. You can rest without feeling like you are losing ground. You can be yourself, fully and unapologetically, because you finally understand that being yourself is not something you need to earn the right to do. It is your birthright. The world will continue to present challenges. People will continue to have opinions. Circumstances will continue to unfold in ways you cannot always control. But when you are grounded in your own worth, when you have built an unshakable sense of self, you meet all of that from a different place. Not from defensiveness or desperation, but from clarity and calm. Not from a need to prove or protect, but from a willingness to engage with what is real. You have spent enough time trying to be someone else. You have spent enough energy contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You have spent enough years believing that your worth was something you had to earn. It is time to come home to yourself. To recognize that you have always been enough. To build a life that reflects that truth. To live with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that you belong to yourself, and that is all you ever needed. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The beginning of a life where you are no longer at war with yourself. The beginning of a life where your worth is not contingent on external validation. The beginning of a life where you can finally, truly, be yourself. And in that being, in that simple, profound act of existing as you are, you will find a peace that nothing outside of you could ever provide. You are enough. You have always been enough. And now, finally, you can live as though you know it. There is one final truth that needs to be spoken, one that often goes unacknowledged in conversations about self-worth and personal growth. The work of building an unshakable self is not a solitary endeavor that exists in isolation from the world around you. You are not building this foundation in a vacuum. You are building it while living a life, while navigating relationships, while facing responsibilities and challenges and the endless demands of being human. And this means that the practice of honoring yourself will sometimes conflict with the expectations others have of you. This conflict is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a natural consequence of choosing to live differently than you did before. When you begin to set boundaries, some people will push back. When you start saying no, some people will be disappointed. When you stop performing the version of yourself that made others comfortable, some people will not understand. They may question your choices. They may accuse you of being selfish or difficult or changed. And in those moments, you will face a choice. You can return to the old patterns, shrink back into the shape that others preferred, abandon the progress you have made in order to restore peace. Or you can hold steady. You can tolerate the discomfort of other people's disappointment. You can trust that anyone who truly values you will be able to adjust to the reality of who you actually are, rather than requiring you to remain a version of yourself that serves their needs at the expense of your own. Holding steady in the face of pushback is one of the most difficult aspects of this work. It brings up fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen as difficult or problematic. And these fears are not irrational. Sometimes, when you change the terms of how you engage with people, they do walk away. Sometimes relationships that you thought were solid reveal themselves to have been contingent on your willingness to self-abandon. And losing those relationships hurts, even when you know, intellectually, that they were not built on a foundation that could support your well-being. But here is what you must remember in those moments of loss. Every relationship you lose because you chose to honor yourself was not a relationship that could have sustained you long-term. It was a relationship built on an unsustainable dynamic, one where you gave more than you could afford to give, where you made yourself smaller than you are, where you suppressed your needs to maintain connection.
And while it is painful to let go, holding on would have been more painful. It would have required you to continue betraying yourself, to continue living in a state of disconnection from your own truth, to continue sacrificing your well-being for the comfort of someone who was unwilling to make space for your wholeness. The relationships that survive your transformation, the ones that remain after you start living from a place of self-respect, are the relationships worth having. They are the relationships where you are seen, valued, and respected as a whole person. They are the relationships that can hold your boundaries, that can adapt to your growth, that do not require you to diminish yourself in order to belong. And while they may be fewer in number, they are infinitely more nourishing than the relationships you maintain through self-abandonment. As you move forward, there will also be moments when you doubt whether this way of living is worth it. There will be times when the old patterns seem easier, when going along seems simpler than standing firm, when accommodating seems less painful than asserting yourself. In those moments, remember why you began this work. Remember the exhaustion of constantly performing. Remember the emptiness of receiving validation for a version of yourself that was not real. Remember the resentment that built up from years of ignoring your own needs. Remember the sense of being lost, of not knowing who you actually were beneath all the roles you played and the masks you wore. The path you are on now is not always easy, but it is honest. It is real. It is sustainable. And it leads to a life where you are no longer at war with yourself, no longer split between who you are and who you think you should be, no longer exhausted from the effort of maintaining a performance that was never meant to last. You are learning to live from the inside out, rather than from the outside in. You are learning to check in with yourself first, to consult your own sense of what feels right, to trust your own judgment. You are learning that you do not need consensus to make a choice, that you do not need permission to honor your needs, that you do not need to justify your existence to anyone, including yourself. This is radical work. In a world that constantly tells you that your worth is conditional, that you need to earn your place, that you should defer to others and minimize yourself, choosing to believe in your inherent value is an act of quiet rebellion. It is a refusal to participate in a system that thrives on your self-doubt. It is a commitment to living as though you matter, because you do. And as you continue to practice this, as you continue to choose yourself again and again, something extraordinary happens. The practice becomes less effortful. The choices become more natural. The sense of being grounded in your own worth becomes less of something you have to remind yourself of and more of something you simply know. It becomes the lens through which you see yourself and the world. It becomes the foundation from which you live. This does not mean you will never struggle. It does not mean you will never doubt. It means that when you do, you will have a place to return to. You will have an internal knowing that, even when it is obscured by fear or uncertainty or old conditioning, remains true. You will have built something within yourself that cannot be taken from you, something that does not depend on circumstances or other people or external validation. You will have come home to yourself. And from that home, you can live a life that is truly yours. A life shaped by your values, your choices, your sense of what matters. A life where you show up as yourself, not as a performance of yourself. A life where your worth is not in question, not because you have proven it beyond all doubt, but because you have finally stopped treating it as something that needed to be proven in the first place. You have done the work of getting here. You have questioned beliefs that once seemed unquestionable. You have faced fears that once seemed insurmountable. You have chosen yourself when it would have been easier to choose comfort. You have held boundaries when it would have been simpler to collapse them. You have returned to yourself, again and again, even when the pull to abandon yourself was strong. This is not nothing. This is everything. And the life that unfolds from this foundation, the life where you finally know your worth, is a life worth living. Not because it is perfect or easy, but because it is real. Because it is yours. Because you are finally, fully, home.